Well, economics really begins with the concept of scarcity and choice. We hear a lot of material, a lot of writings in the press by sociologists and belletrists and other such low-type intellectuals, that we're now living in a post-scarcity age, and that maybe in the 19th century there was such a thing as economics. In the 19th century there was economics, and there was prices and things like that. You had to worry about things like supply and demand. But now in the 20th century, especially in post-1970, we now live in a post-scarcity age. We don't have to worry about such a thing as scarcity, and now there isn't any more economics. Well, the first thing that any economist is trained to think in terms of is that this is a lot of nonsense, because everything is scarce. If it wasn't scarce, it's a very, very good test, I think, to when something is scarce or not, when resources are scarce or not. If it wasn't scarce, then everything would be free, and not only free, but immediate, instantaneous at hand. I like to call it the Garden of Eden model. The Garden of Eden model is essentially that as soon as you wish for something, it's right there. As soon as you wish for the bottle of Pepsi, it's trickling down your throat, with no effort or investment of resources on anybody's part. Now we obviously are not in that kind of situation. We never will be in that sort of situation. And if we were in any way approximating that situation, we would be in a state where everything was more or less almost free. Let's say. I mean, Cadillacs would be selling at a nickel as an approximate. And when we get to the stage when Cadillacs are a nickel or Pepsi is trickling down your throat at your wish, then we can think about revising or scrapping economics and going on to our utopian post-scarcity future. I use a ploy in debate. It's a very good debating tactic against a post-scarcity type a couple of years ago, and I said, if we really lived in a world with post-scarcity, and all you people were talking about post-scarcity would be burning your salary checks, because there's no point in having a salary since everything is free, etc. And my opponent shot back with a statement, well, since we live in we still live in an evil capitalist world where everybody's brainwashed by capitalism, and therefore they haven't gotten to this point yet where they can throw off the shackles. Well, that seems to me obvious, obviously evading the point that everything is scarce. Okay, resources are scarce. Resources consist of time, material objects, and all sorts of consumer or capital goods. We haven't got explaining them yet. But what we have to do with these resources, we have to make sure the resources are allocated to the most useful, most important ends rather than the poorest ends. And here we get to the difference between economics on the one hand and technology on the other. Many people don't really see the difference. Technologically, lots of things are possible, feasible. They're not feasible at all economically. For example, it might be, I don't know, since I'm not really technological expert, but it might very well be technologically possible to build a tunnel from here to San Francisco. Not only that, but a tunnel lined in platinum and precious jewels and so forth. It might very well be possible. It will take, of course, $20 trillion or something, and we wouldn't be able to eat for about 5 years, but we could do it. And the question then is, should we do it? What are we giving up in the process of doing this? And so a tunnel that sort of tunnel might be technologically feasible, but obviously it would be economically unfeasible. Economically unfeasible meaning that the resources, the precious, scarce land, labor, capital, which would have to be used to build the silly tunnel, would much better be used, much more properly be used, producing food, TV sets, clothing, automobiles, etc., etc. All the things that we need much more than we need this tunnel. So the economic problem is a problem of allocating scarce means, scarce resources, to the most important ends rather than the least important ends. And as a matter of fact, the definition of waste, which is really an economic concept rather than a technological concept, the definition of waste is taking scarce resources and applying them to the less than the most important ends. For example, building this tunnel. It might be, it might be a great tunnel once it's through. It might be a feasible tunnel. The tunnel might hold up. It might not, collapse. But, in other words, it would be technologically feasible. But it would be a waste of resources because almost anything else done with a $2-3 trillion would be better than wasting it on this tunnel. So it would be economically ridiculous, even though it would be technologically feasible. I like to, at this point, go into what's known in economics as Crusoe economics. Crusoe is I find a very interesting figure here. First of all, students tend to get very confused at this point. Say, why are we worrying about Robinson Crusoe? We're supposed to be worrying about the modern world. And I try to tell them at that point that I don't really care about Robinson Crusoe or the other. But the purpose of Crusoe economics is to isolate. It's the first to take one person, one man, and pit him vis-a-vis nature, so to speak, and isolate one man vis-a-vis nature, and then see what happens. See how we can analyze his actions, and then bring in other people, bring in Friday and other people, etc. Because we find out we can grasp most of the basic economic concepts just by studying the actions of Robinson Crusoe. Okay, let's take Crusoe on a desert island. Let's say, well, it's better if it's not a desert island. It's a pretty bountiful island. If it's really a desert island, it'd be in pretty bad shape. He's shipwrecked. He starts off with certain resources at his command. First of all, he's got his own personal energy. Commanding this personal energy, he has his own technological knowledge built up over the course of the years. He knows how to make a net. He knows how to, make a bow and arrow and all that sort of stuff. How to build a log cabin and so forth. So he has technological knowledge. He knows he certainly knows what ends he wants to pursue. In fact, he has lots of ends that he has to pursue very, very quickly, or else he's going to die out, such as finding food, shelter, clothing, etc. And then he looks around for the limited resources at his command. He tries to waste as little as possible to achieve his most important ends with the resources he's got. He tries to achieve his most important values with his limited time and resources available. He's okay. So he's got his personal energy. What else has he got? He's got nature. He's got the island, whatever that happens to be. So he starts off with personal energy and nature. These are the two original resources, they're called. Energy is called, and here we have a heritage from late 18th century, early 19th century economics. Personal energy is called labor. Now this has caused a lot of confusion over the years because when we think of labor now, we think of labor in proletarian terms or Marxian terms as somebody who's employed by an employer. This is not what labor means in economic language. Labor means anybody who's using personal energy in the process of, just say, production. In the process of production, I haven't explained what production is yet. Anyway, anybody who's using personal energy in the process of production would be a laborer. So on that basis, for example, the president of General Motors would be a laborer in this sense. The stockholder, somebody who's simply clipping coupons, would not be a laborer. So anybody who's involved directly in using personal energy is using labor. And this is the original 18th century, early 19th century definition. And then there's nature. Now nature has another term for it in economics, which is, again, means sort of the same thing, but not quite, which therefore leads to a lot of confusion. And that's called land. So the reason why it's sort of the same thing, but not quite, is that it's true there's land there, and there's the forest and so forth and so on, but also, for example, there's a river, which has fish in it. Well, the river is called land in economics, in economic theory. In common sense English, it would not be called land, it would be called water. So, in other words, land includes water. On the other hand, land in economics does not include any structure, any man-made structure built on top of it. It's the original nature-given resource. That means land would include the space underneath this building, but not the building on top of it. That's not land. Of course, usually we tend to think again, in the common sense English, we tend to think of land including the buildings on top of it. So here's Crusoe. He has his goals which he set out for himself. He has his values which he's trying to achieve. And he's got limited scarce resources, land and labor, which he has to apply very quickly to achieving these ends. Now, the ends that he has to achieve, he ranks on a scale of values. He has to rank them because he's got to choose, how does he allocate his time, for example? Does he spend the next 3 hours looking for berries or hunting fish or whatever? So, he's got to decide whether he decides how to allocate his time on the basis of his value scale. And the value scale, it doesn't have to be very elaborate. As a matter of fact, it's something like, the example again I use for students is you have a choice of how to spend a block of 3 hours tonight. And you have, like 8 choices. You actually have a lot more in New York. You can go to half a dozen movies, a party, and concert, and so forth, and way down the list is reading your homework, number 20 or something. You make up a little chart for yourself, and you pick what you think is going to be the highest in your value scale. And you allocate your 3 hours to that. So, this value scale it's amazing how much heavy weather has been made out of this very simple concept of economics. How much, millions of wasted words have been spent on this topic. At any rate, it's really a fairly simple concept, basically. Namely, that it's a strictly ordinal scale in the first place. In other words, you're ranking your first movie, second movie, and third movie. You're not saying, well, I think I would prefer, this movie 2.8 times more than the second movie. That's obvious nonsense. I mean, what do you mean by 2.8? One thing. You're making strictly ordinal choices. Rankings, first, second, and third. Well, I prefer this first, this second, this third. Anything else is really, is really meaningless. If you say, I prefer seeing this person 2.7 times more than seeing that person, it's ridiculous. There's no unit that you can use for measurement. So Crusoe or anybody else ranks his values on this ordinal value scale. And the scale can change over time. It usually does. As people learn more, they satisfy one want, another one pops up, and so forth. And of course, different people have different values and different value scales. They might have even the same values, but different rankings for them. But the point of this value scale is strictly ordinal. It cannot be measured. It's really still being thought out in economics. It's an amazing thing. But I guess people need something to do. So this is part of the activity. Okay, so Crusoe finds that nature is beggarly, as we say. In other words, well, he's got that personal energy all right. He's got the stream there and the fish. There's not too much else. So he's got to work hard to do what? He's got to work hard to take these natural resources, take the land, and transform it very quickly into uses and methods and patterns by which he can start enjoying the fruits. In other words, he has to start he has to construct a bow and arrow and hunt deer or something. Or he has to build a net and hunt fish. Or get a log, chop down, get an axe and chop down trees and build a log cabin. So it's only after he gets the fish and after he gets in other words, it's the fish he wants, the fish in the cabin and the deer and the meat that he wants. The other stuff are simply means, byways, paths by which he finally gets to the desired direct use. The directly useful products that he actually uses. In other words, his final goal are called consumer goods. So he eats the fish and he lives in a log cabin and he eats the meat and so forth. This is or he wears the clothing. These are direct consumer goods. Everything else in this process of transformation, of getting from the original nature, natural brook and so forth down to the consumer good, all these other things are called capital goods. So now we have all these other things are called capital goods. So now we have the category of capital goods, which are stations on the way to the consumer good. Anything else, anything which is not either personal energy or land, original land, or is not directly useful, which are consumer goods. All these other things are capital goods. Capital goods are, of course, very heterogeneous, obviously. It consists of all sorts of stuff. For example, in the case of Crusoe, there's only the axe, and there's not too many. There's the axe and the bow and arrow, maybe a boat if he's finally able to construct one. In the modern world, getting back to the modern world, there's an enormous number of capital goods of all sorts of processes and stages of this process, this transformation process. Essentially, the transformation process is called production. So what we mean by production is the use of personal energy, operating on land, and transforming land into this process of capital goods to finally get to the consumer good. Take, for example, all these stages of production that are involved in me eating a ham sandwich tomorrow. The enormous number of stages involving millions of people, literally, and all scattered all over the world. I can't even trace all the stuff going back. If you start just with a ham, you have to then go to the wholesaler of the ham, and then the jobber, and then the meat packer, and then the slaughterhouse, and then back to the pig raiser, and then back to the corn raiser who feeds the pig, and so forth and so on, and the machinery that's used in all this process, plus the land that's used in all this stuff, plus the trucks that are used to transport them, and the tires and the gasoline, all these things, reduce all the way back, so many, many decades, and scattered over a large area. And all these things in the process of production, whether it's the wholesale, whether it's the stockyards, or the trucks, or the inventory of armor or ham or whatever, all these things are capital goods. Until they finally get to the retail store or the restaurant, and you buy them. And then, of course, if you get to the bread, there's the whole process going up to the flour and the miller and all that stuff, and back to the wheat farmer, and the threshing machine, and way, way back. And when you get to the butter on the bread, you go through the whole process again. So the amount of capital goods is enormous. And in each stage of production, land and labor is involved in this whole process. Okay, we have Crusoe allocating his resources. Now going back to Crusoe, he has, let's say, a bunch of logs. This is a famous example used by Bombardier, the great Austrian economist. He has a bunch of logs, each of which are homogeneous. In other words, each log is just as good as every other log. I think of Bombardier's example with horses, which is trickier because some horses might be different, of course, than other horses, stronger, faster, whatever. So here's Crusoe with a certain number of horses. A certain number of logs. He has various uses he can apply them to. He arranges these uses on his value scale, the ordinal value scale, which can be something like this. It can, again, depend on his personal choices and his needs at the time, etc. It can be something like this. Ranking number 1, fire to cook tonight's food. Number 2, ranking second, building a fence. Ranking third, keep the wolves out. Ranking third, extending the log cabin. Ranking fourth, storing the logs for tomorrow's food. And ranking fifth, a real luxury item, building a boardwalk down to the beach so you wouldn't have to get his feet full of sand. Okay, so you have, let's say, these 5 alternative uses for his logs. Then the point is that if he has, let's suppose, if he has five logs available, he will then satisfy each one of these 5 uses. He will then satisfy first, second, third, fourth, and fifth use. If he has only 3 available, then he's going to allocate them to the first, second, and third rank use and leave the fourth and fifth unsatisfied. Because obviously he's not going to bother building the boardwalk if he can't, he hasn't got enough food to eat tonight, that sort of stuff. So, if he happens to have 3 logs available, and he loses one gets washed away by the tide or something, then the value that he places on this log, the loss of a log, how much it means to him is the ranking of a third. It's the third ranked use, because it's the third rank use he's giving up. On the other hand, if he has 5 logs and he loses one, then he's losing only a fifth ranking use. And still on the other hand, if he has only 1 log and that gets washed away and he doesn't eat tonight, he's going to feel very badly. He loses the highest ranking use. So, from this we conclude the first great law of economics, namely that the more he has of a product, the more anybody has of a product, I should say, the lower that will be any unit the lower any value will be placed on any given unit of that product. In other words, if somebody has a lot of something and loses one of it, that will not mean as much to him, will not be ranked as high to him as if he has only a little bit and he loses one of them. This is called the law of diminishing marginal utility. The utility means the same thing as value in economics. Again, it's a peculiar use of the term because utility usually is thought as meaning something which is concretely useful, technologically useful. This is not, in economics, the word utility applies to valuation, really subjective value on the part of the Crusoe or anybody else who happens to do the valuing. So, so we just replace utility by value. Instead of saying ordinal value by utility, instead of saying ordinal value scale, you say ordinal utility scale. Very simple. The marginal refers to the individual unit. You lose 1 unit or you gain 1 unit of something. So it refers to concentrating on individual units, either giving up a unit or gaining a unit. So the law of diminishing marginal utility means if you increase your supply of something, supply meaning n units of whatever product you've got, if you increase your supply of something, the amount that you will value each given unit will be less. If you decrease your supply of something, the amount you will value any given unit will be greater. This could be obviously seen with, take for example water. The amount of utility that you would place on any given glass of water right now is pretty low. You can go out to the hall down here and get some water. You're not going to pay much, for example, for a glass of water. Most cases in New York you can get it free almost. On the other hand, if you're trudging down across the Sahara and you've got your canteen is just about given out, and your supply of water is down to almost zero, you're going to pay a heck of a lot for it. Some oasis, you're approaching an oasis. Because in New York City, the amount of water is very abundant. The number of glasses of water available are very abundant, and so the value placed in any given glass is very low. On the other hand, if you're out in the Sahara, the supply of water is very small, so the amount of value you place in any given glass is going to be extremely high. So that's the law of diminishing marginal utility. One might think this is fairly obvious, but as in all great truths in sciences, social or otherwise, is only obvious after somebody's thought of it, because centuries were spent in worrying about problems that were finally solved with the law of diminishing marginal utility. To be more specific, classical economics, which came in late 18th century and early 19th, and mid-19th century, was hung up on a certain basic problem. They couldn't really analyze consumption very much, because they came up, of course, with a basic philosophical problem, so to speak. Economics. They said, look, here's bread. We all know bread is very important. It's the staff of life and all that. And yet bread is very cheap. The price of bread is very low. On the other hand, here are diamonds, which are, everybody knows, are a luxury and frippery and so forth and so on. Yet they're very expensive. How do we? What's known as this was known for many years as the value paradox. And they couldn't understand. The market can't solve it. They couldn't solve it. They finally said, the classical economists finally said, well, the only thing we can say is that there are two kinds of value, use value and value in exchange. And we have to say that bread is high in use value and low in exchange value, and diamonds are low in use value and high in exchange value. Not a very satisfactory way of handling the problem, obviously. It's the best they could do. And then so the classical economists spent very little time on consumption, zipped over to the businessmen, and they can analyze much more readily because they can analyze profit mechanism, that sort of stuff. But there was a big hole in classical discussion. This problem of value paradox was finally solved in the early 1870s with the arrival of so-called neoclassical economics, where, as in many other cases in the history of science or invention, a given problem is solved by several people independently in different countries. In this case, Karl Menger in Austria and William Jevons in England and Leon Walras in Lausanne, Switzerland. Each one came up independently with different ways of solving this question, but basically coming up with a similar solution. Namely, what they said was, on the market, people don't deal in terms of broad philosophic categories. In other words, on the market, in the real world, people are not asked to choose between all the bread in the world and all the diamonds in the world. If somehow the angel Gabriel came down to us and said, you will now be forced to choose forever and ever between all the diamonds in the world, here and forever, and all the bread in the world, we might very well pick all the bread in the world. But the point is, we select or buy or not buy individual units, loaves of bread versus carats of diamonds. And what's happened is that the supply of bread has been so extensive, so abundant, that the value to any given loaf is very low. On the other hand, the supply of diamonds is quite small, and therefore the price of the value of any given carat of diamond is very high. In other words, you can't deal with consumption and broad philosophical categories. You have to deal with them in terms of how much is this thing valued on the basis of their given supply. If the supply is very abundant, if bread, as I say, if bread had a sudden bread drought or something, if if bread became extremely scarce, we have to buy, $1,000 a loaf of bread, we could easily get to that point sometime. So, the point is that you always have to examine the relationship between the supply of the thing available and the demand for it. So that's that's the way in which the neoclassical economists solve the so-called value paradox. And as I say, after it seemed self-evident, but it didn't seem self-evident before the 1870s. It was at least a century or more headache before this whole question was resolved. And this whole, incidentally, the Austrian and other neoclassical, especially the Austrian method of analyzing economic problems in general, was this sort of method of analyzing individual action, of how does the individual in the real world act, and contrast the classical economists, Smith and Ricardo, etc., who tend to think in broad aggregate categories of who's getting wages or who's getting profits and how are these things being allocated and distributed and so forth. And if you start with broad aggregate categories without start building up from, building blocks from the individual, you get completely thrown askew. The whole analysis gets messed up, and you wind up with tremendous inherent fallacies in the argument. Crusoe, we more or less, most of the categories, let's see, we have production, consumption, land, labor, capital goods. Also, another thing about Crusoe is, which is true about us as well, he's in favor of achieving his wants as quickly as possible. In other words, he'd like to get his log cabin built today rather than next week. And the sooner, as far as he's concerned, the better. This concept is a basic concept of human action, which is called time preference. That people are trying to achieve, if they have any goals at all, which they do, and they try to achieve these goals now rather than later. This is known as, in contrast to the motto, or we can revise the old motto and say, a bird in the hand is always worth more than a bird in the bush, and one bird in the bush. Also, the concept of psychic profit. Crusoe is always trying to benefit from any action that he takes, which we try to do also, at least in the psychic sense. In other words, if he feels that he'd rather rest for 2 hours than go and chop trees, he's doing it because he feels a need for leisure. And so he's then saying, well, this is my most profitable action for the next 2 hours, in the sense of psychic profit. In other words, psychic gain or rising his value scale. If you don't reap a psychic profit from your actions, then you'll be reaping a psychic loss. It's something, going back to the movie choices again. If you say, well, I'm going to spend the next 2-3 hours in movie A, you're doing it because you think that movie A is a better movie than movie B or movie C, or it's a better way of spending your time than some other way. And if you go to movie A and you like it, then you say, okay, this is great. I've reaped the psychic profit from this action. On the other hand, if the movie turns out to be a big bomb, then you say, well, this is a terrible thing. It was a waste of time, or this was a psychic loss. In other words, you would rather have gone, if you look at it from hindsight, you'd rather have gone to movie B. And what then happens is you hope the next time this director makes another movie, you won't go and see it, so that you learn from your experience. This is learning on the market, a feedback relationship with the market. So the concept of psychic profit is everybody's trying to gain a psychic profit, everybody's trying to avoid psychic losses in everything that he does. And another thing about both Crusoe and us is the concept of uncertainty. The world is always uncertain. We never can predict the future totally. And this aspect of trying to anticipate the future, trying to predict it, trying to forecast, and hoping you will succeed, trying to determine whether the movie is going to be any good, having a pretty good idea, hoping you'll be right. This is the intrapreneurial aspect of action. In other words, the aspect of meeting uncertainty of the future. Okay, we have Crusoe now, and we've pretty well analyzed his action. We now bring in Friday into the picture. And either you can have a situation where Crusoe is on one island and Friday's on another island, one of them builds a rowboat, contacts the other, or one of them is on one half of the island, the other one's on the other half, and they contact each other. At any rate, you now have interpersonal contact. And the question is, what's going to happen now? Basically, economically, there are two kinds of relationships that can now be hammered out, so to speak. One is that either Crusoe or Friday can hit the other guy over the head and steal his vast accumulated hoard of meat, log cabin, or whatever. Obviously, it's not going to be very much. But he can do that. He can knock him over the head or kill him or something. This is the hegemonic relationship or theft. It's not going to be too profitable, at least certainly at this stage, it's not going to be too profitable even for the guy who does it, even for the thief. Because after he's finally consumed the meat and consumed fish or whatever, and he really got to the point where he was not too much better off than he was after, before he found the second guy. And what he's lost is, fortunately, what he's lost is the possibility of a special division of labor, specialization relationship. Fortunately, very fortunately for the human race, it turns out that specialization and the division of labor is extremely more productive for all people participating in it. Fantastically more productive than any kind of self-sufficiency, trying to produce everything yourself. Just think of what would happen if we had to produce everything ourselves. And a lot of people, strangely enough, and sometimes I think there's, paraphrase H.L. Mencken, that there's nobody ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of American intellectuals. Because there's still a lot of intellectuals out there who not only say we're in a post-scarcity era, but also say that we should go back or go on or whatever to a regime of self-sufficiency. Specialization is evil and alienating, division of labor also, and therefore everybody should sort of either do everything, which essentially is the Marxian solution, or either do everything and somehow rush around. Well, Marx put it, I think, that everybody in the communist utopia of the future, everybody will spend like an hour a day at the factory and then another hour a day at the field, another hour a day of writing and rushing around to different, a real dilettante kind of utopia. And in that way, developing themselves, all their facilities in every direction. The thing is that sort of development in every direction is going to be pretty limited. I mean, nobody's going to be a great mathematician, for example, by doing math for like half hour a day before you're rushing off to the fields. It's not the way it's done. So creative development, intellectual development is going to be out the window. It's pretty clear. But aside from that, aside from the sociological aspects of it, there's the basic economic aspect that by smashing the division of labor, you're really giving up most of the production of the human race. Even if it were sociologically or culturally or whatever beneficial, philosophically beneficial, to abandon the division of labor, everybody should do everything. Most of us starting this regime would die out very, very quickly at the present time, with the current population level. Just think, for example, what would it mean to produce your own hi-fi set, trucks, food, clothing, etc., etc. Obviously, well, you have to be reduced down to a very, very low primitive level, but even there, we mostly die out because the entire productivity of the modern world rests on the industrial system, rests on the division of labor. Okay, so Crusoe and Friday happily, hopefully, will realize this, and they start exchanging then on a basis, each one starts specializing either in what he can do best or what happens to be the closest resource to him. In other words, if Crusoe's part of the island, there's a lot of fish, and if he's an experienced fisherman from the old days, he gives up all this log production which he doesn't like anyway, and starts specializing in fish. And Friday might be a lumberjack back home, and he starts, he devotes his time to chopping logs. And the two of them then exchange the logs for the fish. Both of them getting more logs and more fish by far than they could have gotten, by trying to be self-sufficient. Now, if this is true for logs and fish, you can imagine how much is true for hi-fi sets, etc., etc. Also, extremely important for the development of the market. And we hear a lot about how the market economy, exchange economy is the rule of the jungle, where the weak are forced to the wall, stuff like that. Actually, just the other way around. If we really had a situation where resources are very scarce, there's the one water hole, and everybody's zeroing in on the water hole, and there's no exchange going on, then it really would be that the weak are forced to the wall, and that would be it. In other words, in a status situation where there's no market possible, that's when the law of the jungle does really apply. But fortunately, not only does everybody participating in the market benefit everybody involved in it, but It turns out that even the schleppiest of us, even the least productive, can participate in the market. The market is arranged in such a way that even in other words, take the Crusoe-Friday situation. Supposing Crusoe is better than Friday, or Friday is better than Crusoe, at both fishing and log cutting. So he's better on both. And one might think that, say, Crusoe is better than Friday on both, and there's no possibility for Friday to participate. There's no possibility for a market to be set up because Friday has nothing to do in this situation. It's too inferior, so to speak. It's not true, because it pays for Crusoe. It's supposing he's 8 times as good as a log chopper and only 5 times as good as a fisherman. It pays for him to concentrate on log chopping, where he's most best at, and then buy the logs from Friday, where he's Friday being least bad at log chopping. It pays for him to do that because the level of both incomes go up by doing that. So this is known. This was David Ricardo coined this concept. This is called the law of comparative advantage. It was originally applied by Ricardo to international trade, and it was only the Austrians later on who applied this to individual exchange, meaning that even if you're a poor country with very few resources and you haven't got, you're not very wealthy, etc., it pays for other nations to trade with you, because it pays for them to concentrate on what they're most best at and trade with and buy the stuff where you're the least worst at, because they're better off. If, for example, the United States is 6 times as productive as Morocco in one area and only twice as productive as Morocco in another area, it pays for the United States to concentrate on what it's 6 times as productive at and buy the stuff from Morocco, even though it's twice as good as Morocco in producing the beans or whatever it happens to be. So, this law of comparative advantage means that there's room for the schleppiest person or the schleppiest nation on the market, on the free market. In other words, there's room for anybody to participate. It means instead of the weakest going under, the weakest have a useful role to play in the whole process. So it's really an exhilarating and happy thought, and yet somehow it's not thought of that among the sociologists, intellectuals, etc. Okay, we now come to and I said the basis of this, the whole market setup, and the law of comparative advantage and the whole exchange system is the natural variety of both individuals and resources. In other words, the fact that every person is different from every other person, has different abilities, tastes, intelligence, etc., and that every land area is different. So that one land area has fish, and the other land area can grow wheat, and so forth and so on. These two things provide the conditions for this exchange system. Okay. We now come to the more formal embodiment of these truths I've been saying here, more diminishing, marginal utility, etc. Coming to the famous demand curve, or supply and demand, is the basic concept really in economics. It used to be said in the 19th century by harsh critics of economics used to say that if you could teach a parrot economics by simply teaching it to say supply and demand. And there's a certain amount of truth to that, because these are the two basic concepts in the field. So at a cocktail party, you can get away, if cocktail parties are interested in economics, which is very doubtful, you can get away with a lot by just saying supply and demand at strategic occasions. The individual, how much the demand curve is how much for the individual is how much any given individual will buy of any product at any given time, at any given range of prices. The demand curve is based on derived from the law of diminishing marginal utility. In other words, that you might be willing to pay. For example, I'm a chess player of very, very small ability, let's say. I might be willing to pay $30 for my first chess set, but then for buying a second chess set, like from my den or something, spare chest that I might be willing only to pay $5 and so forth. So that, again, because the greater my supply of the product I have, the lower the value I place on it. And so the lower the price, the amount of money I'd be willing to spend for it. So from this diminishing marginal utility, we get the truth that the demand curve or the demand schedule is falling. In other words, as the quantity of the good increases and the price as the quantity of good increases, as the price falls, the quantity demanded, the quantity purchased will increase and vice versa. So that if, for example, I happen to be a great chess fan, I might be willing to spend $30 on a chess set, but when you get to the point where it's $100, I'm priced out of the market, so to speak. The other half, it gets down to $5, I'll buy a second set. So you get what's known as the falling demand curve. This is figure 1. Price is always on the y-axis, some reason, and quantity is on the x-axis. So in this situation, for the individual, for any given individual, the higher the price, the less he's going to pay, the less he's going to buy of it, and the lower the price, the more he's going to buy of it. You have something like this. You have a falling demand curve, D, or DD. Why, you might ask, is the demand curve a straight line? Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting footnote in history of economic thought. For a long time, they drew the demand curve, the textbook writers, as a rectangular hyperbola. In other words, with the area underneath it always constant. And they did this for many years, and then suddenly, in the mid-40s, one economist said, why are they doing this? There's no evidence for it. There's no evidence at all. Why not have a straight line? And so since then, the demand curve has always been a straight line. There's no evidence for that either. It's easier to draw it that way. One thing you have to realize, I'm a fan of demand and supply curves in a sense, but the one thing that has to always be remembered about them is we never know what they are. The big problem in economics texts is that the economics texts say, demand curve is given here. We've given the demand, you give them a cost, and then you crank out the answer. You crank out production, you can't crank out prices. And that's it. And it all seems like a very mechanical thing. It's like you're putting money in a slot and you get the answer out. But the thing is, in real life, in the real business world, we don't know the demand curve. Nobody knows the demand curve. Nobody knows the cost, really, either. So the whole thing is a very uncertain kind of picture. You don't start off, hey, it's a given demand curve, given cost curve. Because if that's true, you wouldn't have to, all you have to do is to take a course in economics. You can run the whole industry of the whole country very, very simply. So the problem is, the economists began to get enamored of all the curves. And it's got to the point now where most people who take economics courses come away from it thinking that they're sort of third-rate math courses. There are a lot of tangencies and curves on the board and so forth and so on, and not knowing too much about what they mean, because the means have become the ends in themselves. Originally, the curves are supposed to illustrate and clarify thought. What happened was the thought began to drop out, and the curves took on a life of their own. Okay, so we have this demand curve. The concept is at any given time you buy so much of this product, and if the price is lower, you buy a lot less, buy a lot more. It's obvious that it's pretty obvious if for some reason Wheaties became a nickel a box, there'd be a lot more Wheaties purchased. If for some reason Wheaties were up to $1,000 a box, very few people, except real Wheaties fanatics, would buy any. So it's a fairly simple, again, fairly common sense kind of insight. All right, this is the individual demand curve. Then what you simply do is you sum up, at least conceptually. It's not simple at all because you don't even know the individual demand curve. Conceptually, however, if you want to, at least conceptually, how many Wheaties will be bought at a given price in the whole market, not just for one person, but summed up over everybody. Then you sum up all these individual demand curves into one big market demand curve, which is also falling. It's falling for two reasons. One thing is the individual demand curves are falling. So if each individual demand curve is falling, then the sum will also be falling. And secondly, as you keep cutting the price, you tap new people coming on the market at all. In other words, I enter the chess market when it's $25, let's say. Other people enter the chess market when it's $10. So as you keep lowering the price, more people will enter the market altogether. So as you do this, the market, the demand curve keeps getting flatter as you keep, and it falls even more sharply as you keep going. So, the individual demand curves are falling and the market demand curves are falling. And this really is the end of the individual demand curve for all purposes. We've arrived, at least conceptually, at the market demand curve. Conceptually, what the market demand curve says is at any given time, in other words, if we freeze right now, as of this moment, if we freeze the country, like one of these freeze shots on the movies, and if the price then were such and such, if the price of Wheaties were $1,000, how many Wheaties would be bought? If the price were $20, how much would be bought? Et cetera, et cetera. If the price were a nickel, how much would be bought? You have your falling demand curve. Obviously, you don't know what the shape of the demand. You don't know what the demand curve is. You don't know how much will be bought. All you know is that it's falling. All we really know is, theoretically, is that more will be purchased when Wheaties are a nickel than if Wheaties were $1,000 a box. And a lot of attempts, of course, to measure the demand curves, they're all a lot of nonsense, and I don't want to take up the time in this course to explain why they're nonsense. But one of the basic rules of economic theory is that all the laws we have, all the truths we have, are qualitative rather than quantitative. As soon as if anybody tells you about quantitative laws, watch out, because there aren't any. Okay, we have the market demand curve, and then at any given time we have a certain amount of whatever it is available, a certain amount of supply. Supply meaning a number of homogeneous units, whether it's 1 unit, 20 units, 100, 2 million, or whatever. Now since it's at any given time, since we're freezing the economy at this moment, that means the supply line is always vertical, like so. S being vertical. Now this, of course, goes against those of you who've taken economics courses before. Of course, you all know that supply curves are supposed to be forward sloping, but they're really not. They're really vertical. Because what this is saying is that what you have is you have a bunch of stuff which is there. How it came there, we're not talking about yet. That's, of course, important, but not at this moment. We have a bunch of stuff, whether it's Wheaties, hula hoops, copper, spoons, doesn't matter. We have a bunch of units of things available. And then we have people, the whole market, consumers in the market, evaluating them. And the evaluations will be based on their value scales, whether it's high on their value scale or low on their value scale. And the demand curve based on these value scales is falling, like so. And the supply line will be vertical because that's what you've got. Regardless of what the price is, you have 100,000 boxes of Wheaties and you can't do much about it, at least for this moment. Obviously, in the long run, you can change the supply. But right now, you have so and so many spoons, so and so many Wheaties, so and so many hula hoops, and that's it. So you have your vertical supply line and your falling demand curve. Now what this gives you, this interaction of these two, is that the intersection point between the falling demand curve and the vertical supply line, this point here, say E, equilibrium point, is the so-called day-to-day or market equilibrium price. And the reason it's called equilibrium price is because this is the price toward which the price of this product will tend to move, and at which it will tend to stay. And if it's displaced from it, it will tend to remain there, or go back to it. In other words, the intersection of the demand curve and supply curve will tend to determine the price of the product. So, if you want to know what the price of Wheaties is, the price of Wheaties will be determined by the demand curve for Wheaties and the supply line of Wheaties, and the intersection point will be when I say 10, I mean, day to day, I mean very quickly. Okay, why is that? What are the forces that cause this to be the price determining factor? Okay, let's assume for a minute that the price of this product is higher than the equilibrium, so-called equilibrium price. The word equilibrium, of course, comes from physics and so forth, meaning tending to remain in this spot or coming back to it. It's an attempt, again, of economics to ape so-called hard sciences. Supposing the price is higher than the equilibrium price. The price is higher. This means that this is $10 a case, whatever it is, widgets or Wheaties or whatever. And right now it's really up to $18 a case. At that point, the supply, the amount offered for sale, supply of the widgets or Wheaties, is considerably greater than the amount that consumers will buy, the demand for it, quantity demanded. So what you have is this gap here, surplus. People are trying to sell 100,000 Wheaties, boxes of Wheaties, instead, however, but at this high price, consumers can only buy 80,000 boxes. There's 20,000 left over. Something which businessmen and sellers don't like. This is what is known as an unsold surplus. Can't get rid of it. How do you get rid of your unsold surplus? Well, you start lowering your price. And as you lower your price, businessmen begin to find, as if by magic, the surplus begins to disappear. As the price is lowered, more and more quantities are purchased, until finally the price is lowered down to the equilibrium point, where all the unsold surplus is gone and the market is what is known as cleared. In other words, the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied at that price. Up here, at the price above the equilibrium point, the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, and you have trouble. You have the unsold surplus. There. Supposing, on the other hand, that the price is below the equilibrium price, say down here. Well, in this case, Wheaties are 25 cents a box, let's say, something like that. At that point, the 5 cents a box, only have whatever it was, 100,000 boxes of Wheaties supplied, but people are trying to buy 180,000 boxes. Where's the Wheaties? And what happens is there's a big run on the Wheaties business, and there's a big shortage. Big shortage develops. You can't find it in the stores anymore. If, for example, the government decreed tomorrow that Wheaties from now on can be sold only 2 cents a box, you can take my word for it, the Wheaties would disappear from the shelves very, very quickly. Everybody and his brother would rush to get this bargain price for Wheaties. Wheaties would be clean out and that'd be the end of it, because nobody in his right mind would be producing Wheaties for 2 cents a box. Okay. So shortage develops. Businessmen in response to this shortage, the fact that there's more demanded than supplied at that price, will start raising the price. And as they raise the price, they find that the gap is eliminated, and when finally you get to the equilibrium price, again, the market is clear. There's neither an unsold surplus nor a shortage. So here, and any price above the equilibrium price, supply is greater than demand. Any price below it, demand is greater than supply. And at the equilibrium price, you have the market being cleared, where there's an exact balance between demand and supply. That means that the equilibrium price, there's enough people to buy, and just enough people to buy whatever is available of a product. And there's just enough at that price available for whatever people want to buy. So the market then has a beautiful built-in mechanism, so to speak, of balancing the amount available with the amount that people want to buy of a product. And we will soon see what happens when certain forces, largely the government, try to interfere with this process. This beautifully equilibrating mechanism. So this gives the price determining mechanism on the market. All right. If this is true, and I think it's unexceptionable, then how can a price ever change? We have the price pretty well set here, fixed by the amount of supply of a vertical supply line and the flowing demand curve. In that case, what will cause a price to change? Well, obviously either one of two things, or both. either the demand changes or the supply changes. And then if we analyze any price, or any price changes in any field, we start looking for these two factors. What happened to the demand for it? What happened to the supply of it? Well, the demand can change for various reasons. Demand can change, for example, through fashion. Excuse me. The king, let's say, or the queen comes out with I like a certain brand of martini. Immediately, half the country rushes to buy a certain brand of martini, and the price, demand skyrockets for that brand of whiskey, or vice versa. Jackie Onassis decrees something or other is seen wearing some kind of thing, and everybody starts buying that. Or the thing drops out of fashion for one reason or another. So demand can change and does change for that reason. People, the hula hoop, for example, had a big play a few years ago. There was a big increase in demand for hula hoops, and then there was a big collapse after about a year and a half of hula hoop mania, and then the frisbee came in after that. So there was a shift from the hula hoop market to the frisbee market. Demand curve for hula hoops went up, and demand curve for frisbees, hula hoops went down, and demand curve for frisbees went up. So that's one thing that can change it. Of course, the supply can change. Why will the supply change? Well, the supply can change again for various reasons, one of which can be in response to demand, and we'll see later. But one reason, of course, is purely technological. In the agriculture, for example, if there's a big drought, wheat supply goes down. For example, in this figure 1, supposing there's a big wheat drought, or let's say, wheat drought is half the Middle West has too much rain or too little rain or whatever it is. There's a big drop in wheat supply coming in this season. In that case, the supply curve shifts to the left. The vertical supply line, which this year was X million bushels of wheat, is now X minus whatever. So this means that the old price, the old equilibrium price, which before this cleared the market, now doesn't perform this, because now it turns out that the old price is now a big shortage, because not enough wheat now to satisfy the demand at that particular price. So the result of that is, because of the shortage, the price quickly goes up, and as it goes up, the shortage is eliminated, and we wind up with a new intersection point, or a new equilibrium point, which again clears the market. It clears the market at a higher price, of course, in order to, again, see to it that there's just enough people to buy the lower amount of wheat that's available. So we now have a lower quantity for a higher price at the new supply line, which is S prime. So you can see that one of the functions that the price system performs is a rationing function. The fact that if the price of everything were free, everybody would grab it unlimitedly, infinitely. Since we don't have an infinite supply of anything, it has to be a price. The more scarce the product, or the more scarce the commodity, the higher the price tends to be. And the more, and these people now get priced out of the market. These people who have to drop out of the market because of the higher price, or the so-called marginal buyers. And so as the price goes up, the price system performs a very important rationing function. The only other way of performing a rationing function would be for the government or somebody to choose who would get the product and who wouldn't, which of course leaves us up with many different kinds of problems, at least. If, on the other hand, the supply goes up, it goes from S prime to S, for example. We started up at S prime, and instead of a wheat drought, there's a big increase in wheat production. The climate is very good this season, or there's a much better fertilizer use, or whatever. Then the supply curve shifts. Say from S prime to S, shifts to the right, and it means that the old price is now a surplus, an unsold surplus. People don't want to buy this new increased product at the old price, and so price falls, and we have
we're back down again to a lower price in order to induce people to buy the increased amount. So we have supply curves or supply lines moving up and down given demand curves. Given a demand curve, given the tastes and wants for a particular product by the public, supply line will move up and down it. In other words, as the supply falls, the price goes up, and as the supply rises, the price goes down. The price will go down in order to induce people to buy the increased product. Here we have, of course, one point, which is always a problem of the economics teachers and students, etc. You got to cross this point. The difference between when the supply goes up and the quantity demanded increases from here to here, the difference between that and changing the whole demand curve. In other words, the whole demand curve increasing because hula hoops are more fashionable now than frisbee. If the whole demand curve increases, it means that at any given price, more will be purchased than before. And it's a completely different concept, of course, than going up and down the given demand curve. Usually in economics, there's a shorthand. If you say there's an increase in demand, what's meant is the whole demand curve shifts up. In other words, at any given price, more will be purchased. Already, I think we're beginning to see something. Should be able to see something at this point. We're not going to get to the money question until much later in this course. But already we should begin to see what can cause all prices to go up. I mean, we're in a point now, of course, of accelerating inflation. What can cause a situation where almost every price is going up, some, of course, more than others? Either because the supply of everything is rapidly going down, which is obviously not true. The supply of goods is more or less about what it is now, is increasing each year, certainly not going down every year, or because the demand for everything is going up. But if demand for everything is going up, and we're talking in terms of consumers with a certain given income, consumers can shift their purchases, say, from hula hoops to frisbees, in which case the demand for hula hoops goes down, the demand for frisbees goes up. How can the demand for both hula hoops and frisbees go up? Where are they getting the money from? How can if the consumers are getting a certain income, how can the demand for everything go up? Where's the magic source from which the money is flowing so they can increase all their demand curves? And this, of course, is the $64 or $64,000 question. If the skip ahead of that is a teaser, the demand curves can only all go up if somewhere down in the basement somebody's printing a lot of money, quotes, and shoveling them out onto the public. So everybody thinks they're better off and happily spending this new money, which then causes prices to go up. Anyway, that's of course just a teaser for later. I think that's our first lecture. 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 That's